Hello, how are you all? This video is going to be one that explains a residential buyer tenant representation agreement. So in Texas, realtors usually ask a client to sign a buyer representation agreement when they're working with their buyer clients for a couple of different reasons. It protects the buyer in that another agent can't say, well, they're my client, they're working for me, and now the buyer owes me a commission because he jumped to somebody else. The other thing that it does is it protects the realtor from another agent trying to steal their client as well. So whenever you deal with realtors, one of the first things that a buyer will realize is when they call on a property, the first thing they'll ask is, are you working with a realtor? Because if we're a member of the Association of Realtors, we are not allowed under our code of ethics to interfere with other people's clients. So now I'm going to go straight into the explanation of the paperwork. So on the first page, you have the parties, the client, the agent point. That basically gives the agent the right to represent the client. Now, keep in mind, this is as per the Residential Buyer Tenant Representation Agreement. Alrighty, so there's going to be a little break because I got called while I was filming this video. So the appointments, so I was saying this paperwork is last updated February 1st of 2018. So you might want to check the date on the paperwork. You should find the date on this document on the bottom left side of every page. So definitions: acquire means purchase or lease. Closing means the complete sale. Market area, that's the area in which that the buyer is looking in the state of Texas. Property means any kind of real estate. So it can't be just the mobile home because that's considered personal property. It's the actual piece of land and any improvement on there unless specified differently. It'll have the beginning and end date. Now, can there be a termination? Yes, if all parties agree. The broker's obligations, it's the realtor's obligation to represent the buyer and give their best efforts to help the client purchase the property. The client's obligation is to work only with the agent, and the important thing for that is multiple fold. It protects them, it protects the agent, and working with just one realtor also benefits you because they know exactly what you've seen, what you like, what you don't like, what your preferences are, and they know how to best handle your purchase of the property. Representations. This is page 278. Each person has legal capacity and the right to sign. The client represents that they're not a party to another agreement. The client represents that any information is correct. And if they're using a relocation company or benefits, then they need to specify that. Intermediary. So my broker, my boss, would be an intermediary in the case that I were to help a client buy a property where the seller is represented by another agent within my company. And the important reason to explain this is because my boss, my broker, would not be allowed to convey confidential information in either direction. So it explains that the owner of the property also works for the same company. If, for example, I had a house for sale and my buyer decided they wanted to buy that property, in that situation, I cannot technically represent to both sides. So like, for example, let's use the analogy of getting a divorce and going to court. One attorney cannot fully represent both sides. They can write the documents or represent one side and have the other party sign off if the other party is okay with that. But when it comes to negotiating anything, price, condition, closing, fees to be paid, there's always going to be somebody that's going to win a little more than the other. It's very hard to say it's right down the middle because usually a buyer wants as much as they can. The seller wants to keep as much as they can. And so you've got that push and pull. So That's what intermediary explains. Now, if I were to have a buyer that wanted to buy a property that I have for sale, then I have to explain to that buyer, I do not represent you. I have to be fair and honest. I cannot break any laws, and I have to give you every single explain every single opportunity you have in a counter or in a response. Okay. If a client does not want to do intermediary, then let's say if I have a buyer that doesn't want to do that, then that means that they are won't want to look at any properties that my office has for sale, because then that puts my broker, my boss, in that intermediary position. So I always say, don't do that. Don't limit yourself. I will still represent you, give you the best advice and opinion. Now this goes a little bit more into explain, can't disclose, price, whether they'll go up or down in either direction, confidential information, treat all parties with honesty, and comply with all the real estate rules and laws. Now, competing clients. So if I were working with a buyer and he was looking for, let's say, a very specific home, I have to disclose to them that I have another buyer, if I do, looking for the very same thing, especially if both buyers are wanting to make offers. So I've never had that be an issue, so I'm not too concerned about that. Confidential information during the terms of this, during the term of this agreement or after its termination, broker may not knowingly disclose. So I cannot disclose any information even after the close of the house or the sale of the property. And unless otherwise agreed to or required by law, a seller or seller's agent is not obligated to keep the existence of an offer or its terms confidential. So if the listing agent receives multiple offers, the only thing, the listing agent is obligated to treat all the buyers fairly in the transaction, okay? And that would fall under, agents within my office as well. Broker's fees, this is where basically I'm saying that I charge 3% of the sales price, and as a buyer, you really don't have to worry about that 99.9% of the time, because the seller normally pays that. Now, if we were to find a for sale by owner, then in that case, we would ask the seller to pay for my commission. That's for me bringing the buyer to them and handling the entire transaction from beginning to end. In the case that the seller doesn't want to do that, then I would ask the buyer to do that. I've never really had to do that, thank God, because most sellers are happy to compensate the agent for the work that they do. Source of commission, we kind of talked about that already. It is only earned and payable unless we get to closing and the deal funds. Now, let's say there's a situation where the seller tries to bail at the last minute and the buyer forces their hand and takes them to court, and the court rules in their favor, then at that point I would be owed a commission. Fortunately, I've never had that happen, and I hope to never have that happen. So that's that portion. Additional compensation, if seller, landlord, or their agents offer compensation into excess of it, but not limited to marketing incentives or bonuses, broker may retain the additional information. And so if, for example, if the other agent is offering me a bonus, I'm not necessarily required to, broker's listing agent with the owner, and the client will have an obligation to pay broker. Then basically I get to keep it. I don't have to disclose it, but my boss can also keep the additional for specific conditions. So, oh no, I'm so sorry. All right, let's start over. So let's see, additional compensation. If the seller, landlord, or agents offer compensation of excess amounts stated in paragraph 11A, including but not limited to market incentives, broker may retain the additional compensation. So if I were to charge, let's say, if I were to charge 7% as a seller's agent, I will pay it according to the listing agreement. If I'm only offering 3% to the buyer's agent, I could keep the 4%, the difference of the 7 and the 3. The client is not obligated to pay the broker. So, for example, if the buyer's agent is offered a bonus, the bonus does not come from the buyer either. Okay. Acquisition of broker's listings, notwithstanding any provision of the contrary, if client acquires a property listed by the broker, it'll be paid. So basically, let's say another agent in my office has the listing, my buyer, I help my buyer make the offer. Let's say, it says 3% in the multiple listing, and that's what I will get paid, okay? In addition to compensation, for example, if the buyer buys new construction, then my commission would be 3% of the sales price. It's pretty standard. I've not really ever had an issue with that, where the builder is not willing to pay the commission. If the broker refers a client to a third party, like a contractor, service provider, cable company, I may receive a fee from that provider for a referral fee. I normally don't do that because I don't like the responsibility of that contractor. So I usually don't charge that. Protection period. Okay, so 60 days after this agreement ends, and no later than 10 days after that, I have to provide a list of all the properties that I showed. If this buyer winds up buying any of these properties within 60 days after that, then I am owed a commission. However, if they wind up buying, hiring another agent, then I am out. Okay. All right. Okay. So, escrow authorization. The client authorizes the title company to do the closing. They'll acquire payoff. They'll work up all the numbers for the mortgage company and make sure that all the documents are signed. Now, one thing to make sure and understand is that the title company does not represent any person in the transaction. Okay. All monies are paid in El Paso County. If there's a dispute, both the buyer and the buyer's agent agree to go to mediation first. It's cheaper and it's faster. If either party of the contract failed to comply with the contract, they are in default. If the client is in default, they're liable for any compensation to the agent. If the broker is in default, the client may exercise any remedy at law, so they can sue. Attorney's fees, if we wind up going to court, which I hope we don't, the loser may have to pay the winner's attorney's fees. Limitation of liability. I'm not responsible, none of the associates are responsible for any kind of personal injury or loss on a property that's not caused by me or my company. Client will hold us, the agent, the broker, and their associates harmless from any injuries or losses. Client will indemnify broker against any claims or damages that result from that are caused to others on their property. So we sell homes, but we don't secure their safety. So we always try to, follow every single precaution we can, but things can and do happen. So it's always very important to be vigilant. The other things that are attached to this agreement is information about brokerage services, protecting your home from mold, information concerning property insurance, general information and notice to buyers and sellers. For your protection, get a home inspection. Okay, so there's different videos in this playlist that explain all those other documents. If there's any special provisions, we would enter those under number 17, but I've never had a need, and I try not to because I'm not an attorney. Additional notices, what we get paid is not, what we get paid as realtors is not a fixed amount. And it's important to explain that because if we were to say that, then we would be breaking the antitrust laws. This also, subsection B says that we cannot discriminate. We cannot discriminate race, color, religion, national origin, sex, disability, familiar status, sexual orientation, or gender identification. C, broker is not an inspector, engineer, assessor, inspector, so we hire out for those items. And D, if a client purchases a property, they always have the right to do an abstract of title. Now, normally the title company will provide title insurance, but if you feel like you want to take it an extra step, you have the right to hire an attorney to do an abstract. And it's kind of like a mini history. And basically what that does is that it's like a history of the chain of ownership. The only times I've ever seen that needed or heard of it needed is when like let's say a ranch is owned in a family for 200 years, and it's passed down from one family member to the other, but the title wasn't done because back in certain times the title work wasn't always recorded at the courthouse. So an attorney can actually go back and trace the history and trace all the heirs to make sure that the property belongs to the person that is selling it, and so that there's no title issues later. I've never had a client need an abstract of title. I don't know that I ever will, but it's an option, and that's why they put it in the Texas Association of Realtors paperwork. Or should I call it Texas Realtors? That's what they renamed it. So let's see. Client may purchase a residential service contract, but they need to make sure that they are companies that are allowed to work in Texas. So what that is the home warranty. Make sure that the home warranty company that you use is licensed in Texas because they are regulated. When viewing a property, always be aware that, with all the technology that we have today, a lot of people have recording equipment in the property. The seller is supposed to notify one of the parties or some of the parties that are in the property that they are being recorded. Unfortunately, not all agents know this, or not all agents relay that information. So my suggestion always is to be careful and just kind of keep quiet until you leave the house as far as your opinion, as far as what you're willing to do or not to do. The risk of wire fraud. So there's a lot of wire fraud going on. If you ever get an email from the title company saying that they're changing the wiring instructions, do not even respond to that email. Do not click on any links. You pick up the phone and you call me, because there's a 99.9% chance that that's actually some kind of wire fraud. Somebody hacked into the server, sent you an email that looks completely legit, and wants you to send your money somewhere else that's going to be gone and lost forever. So, and then of course it says at the end, if you, I cannot give legal advice. So, and this is a legally binding contract. So before you sign, you have the right to consult with an attorney. So this is one of the larger documents in the buyer package. If you have any questions or concerns, feel free to call. Bye.